The last test that we're going to write is going to be intended to target the setMessage function right here. So we want to create our new instance of the contract, which we're already doing in the beforeEach method. We're then going to attempt to modify the message by calling setMessage, and then we're going to retrieve the message again by using the automatically generated function message. So let's write this test out inside of our test file. I'm at the bottom of inbox.test.js, and we're going to add another it block inside of here. So I'm going to say it can change the message. I think that's reasonably descriptive. Now, I probably can make a very reasonable assumption that we're going to use some asynchronous code inside this method, so I'm going to mark it as being async. Now, inside of here, we have access to the inbox instance from right here that we defined in the beforeEach. So I think all we really have to do is attempt to change the message and then retrieve it, just like how we did from the previous test, and then make sure that it gets updated in some fashion. So in total, I think we really just need one new line of code. We just need to figure out how we can change the message. To change the message, we're going to again reference inbox.methods. So this methods object right here is something that we're going to touch again and again and again. Remember, it's the way that we get the ability to change some data or retrieve data from our contract. This time, rather than calling the message function, we're going to call the setMessage function. And we're going to place the first set of parentheses immediately after that. Now remember what we just discussed in the last video. This first set of parentheses right here is going to take some arguments that are going to eventually get forwarded on to the setMessage function. So whatever we pass into that first set of parentheses will show up in this function as the new message. So for me, I'm going to pass in a new message of, how about just bye? Now calling setMessage isn't enough. After calling this function, we have to then kind of like send this thing out to the network. So we do the initial setup right here, and then we have to actually send this transaction out to the network. This goes back to the same topic we were just discussing a moment ago. So we were just a moment ago retrieving some data off of our contract, and to do that, we were calling a function. But this time, we are definitely without a doubt, trying to modify our contract's data. Without a doubt, that's what we're doing this time. Whenever we want to send a transaction to a function, we have to specify where the transaction is coming from, or it would be better to say who is issuing the transaction. So we're going to call a method on this thing called .send. You can think of send right here as being like send transaction. That's what's really happening behind the scenes. And then we're going to pass in an object that describes who is paying for this. Who is paying the money, who is paying the gas to actually modify some data inside of our contract. This is, again, where it's really handy that the Ganache CLI automatically creates a set of accounts for us right here. So when we want to say who is going to pay for this thing, we can simply say this message is coming from accounts at 0. So accounts is our array of account addresses. We're going to take the first address out of there and have that person pay for sending this change into the network. Now the last thing to keep in mind is that, yep, this is an asynchronous action right here, so we have to wait for it to be completed. We're going to mark it with await, like so. Now one thing I want to remind you about, whenever we send a transaction to a function, we get back the transaction hash. We get back a little bit more information than just the transaction hash, but essentially we just get back an object that you can consider to be kind of a receipt for the transaction we sent in. So we're not going to get back any actual message. Nothing's going to come back and say like, oh, here's the message that was just set. So usually whenever we send a transaction to a function inside of tests, we usually don't assign the result to any variable because we get back the transaction receipt. And honestly, we can just assume that the transaction occurred successfully. If the transaction does not occur successfully, then this method right here is going to throw an error, and that will cause our entire test suite to fail. So we don't really have to put in an additional thing here to take the transaction and verify that it went through okay. If everything happens okay, then this line of code is going to proceed, and we're going to go to the next line of code. If something goes wrong, an error is just going to be thrown. And that's going to be our signal that we need to do a little bit of debugging. So with that in mind, we can really just do the next two steps. which are going to be to retrieve the new message that just got set, just like we did up here, and then to assert that the message got updated successfully. So let's add that in as well. We'll say const message is going to be await inbox.methods.message.call. And do make sure that you get both sets of parentheses here. That's a super easy typo to make. I can almost guarantee it that you'll make it one time in this course. And then finally, we're going to assert that the message that we just retrieved is equal to the string by, because that's what we just attempted to update it to. All right, so let's save this. Let's run our tests and see how we're doing. So I'll npm run test. We will again wait that very awkward 5 seconds. And then we'll expect to see that both of our, or all three I should say, of our tests have passed. And it looks like they all did. Great. So that's pretty much it for writing tests around our contract. This is definitely one of the simplest implementations that we can effectively test inside of a project, but we will be writing other tests or working on other contracts in this course that are going to get far more complex and a little bit more difficult than what we see here. So this was a very good place to get an introduction and a warm up to testing. Now let's continue in the next video. We still need to work on deploying this contract to a local network. So let's take care of that in the next video.